Good day. My name is Les Bradshaw. I'm going to be building the Estes Loadstar, which is a two-stage rocket. Um, so effectively, when we're building this, we're building two rockets as one. First thing I did is I opened up the bag of parts. You'll find that there should be two motor tubes for the first stage and the second stage. The yellow tube is a tool that'll be used but then thrown out. There's two engine blocks, one for each stage, centering rings, nose cone and transition, main body tube, clear payload tube, the booster body tube, the coupler, shock cord, two sets of balsa sheets, and the parachute and decals, and of course the instruction sheet. Some things you're going to need to help build the rocket is you're going to need a pencil, going to need a sharp knife. I've got a hobby knife, might be able to get by with a sharp steak knife. You're going to need some glue. I happen to use Type Bond 2. You can use Elmer's glue wall. You can use the Elmer's school glue, but it's not as good. But if it's all you have, you can get by with it. It's just a little bit thinner and takes a little bit longer to dry. You'll also need a door frame for marking the tubes, and you'll need a little bit of sandpaper. You can buy a sheet from any hobby big box store, Lowe's, Home Depot, or any other hardware type store. What we're doing, either 220 or 320 grit will be preferred. So we are going to follow along per the instructions. And the first step, make a little bit of space here. Is we want to take some of the sandpaper, maybe cut off a section. And with the pieces still attached, we're going to sand the balsa sheet, primarily where the cutouts are. You don't have to do the entire sheet. You do want to do both sides. And do both sheets that come with the kit. So as I had said, we are effectively going to be building two rockets here. And that's why you'll find that there's two sets of fins. There's going to be the booster section that will initially launch it up, and then that motor will burn out and it'll ignite the next motor, and the sustainer or second stage will continue up. There are things you can do to make the rocket go even higher. Just general comment, the higher it goes, the greater chance you're going to lose it. And then just another comment, you can fly this. It's just a single stage. Just fly the top end. Again, if it's going to be windy or something, that might be recommended to make certain you get it back. Okay. If you look at the fins, you'll see that there's little tabs where it isn't quite cut laser burned all the way through. So using your knife, you're going to lightly run along those edges to break those tabs. To free the fins from the sheet. And if you have trouble getting through from one side, feel free to flip it over and work it from the other side. Sometimes the tabs can be a little difficult to cut. Now, I'm going to keep the scrap balsa for a little bit to make some tools for later on. You can see that the fins are slightly different size, so make sure that you keep them separate to know which is which. Okay, now something to else notice. You can see there's a grain for the wood. The edge that's parallel to the grain is called the leading edge. This wider part is the root edge. This is the part that will glue to the rocket. And then you got the trailing edge. You can make the rocket fly higher by rounding the leading and trailing edge. It's not required, but it will fly a little bit higher if you want to spend the extra time. But again, the higher it goes, the more likely that you can lose it. But otherwise, just carefully sand. I basically start sanding, basically holding the sandpaper at about a 45-degree angle, trying to break that edge. And my goal is to kind of round the leading edge, and I'll do the same for the trailing edge. And I'm going to stop the video while I do all 6 fins, because there's no sense you guys watching me do this forever. By the way, do not round the edges on these little rectangular pieces. Okay, the next step, we need to cut out the pattern. I like to make a copy and save the instructions. So I went down to my printer copier and made a copy. We're first going to cut out the tube marking guide. And as may have guessed from the name, we're going to use it to mark the tube. So you're going to wrap it around the tube. Try to get these two little marks to line up so that they're straight. Then using a piece of Scotch tape, masking tape, secure it around the tube. Okay. Now, where the line is on the tube, take your pencil and mark both the top and bottom. The one that's labeled LL, put a mark on the tube next to it. You can just do one L. Now we need to get this also onto the booster tube. You could untape it, rewrap it. Or you can slide the tube coupler in, put the other tube on, and then just slide it up and over onto the other tube. You don't have to worry about the launch lug line on the booster. So just mark the 3 fin lines. Only other thing you want to be careful about is as you're rotating it, it doesn't shift on you, because we're trying to get 3 lines equally spaced. Oh, something I forgot to mention, out of order. So here you could see how I sanded rounded the leading and trailing edges. But you can kind of see these little nubs on the root edge of the fin from where we cut it off from the balsa sheet. Take your piece of sandpaper and do multiple fins together. Lightly sand to try and get rid of the worst of the nubs there. And do that for both sets of 3 fins. You don't need to sand a lot, you're just trying to clean it up. Okay, so now we have to take the tube, and at this point you basically need a door frame. What we're going to do is, sorry about this, line one of the marks up against an edge, and then run a pencil line down the length of the tube. Unfortunately, I can't hold the tube, hold the pencil, and hold my phone at the same time. But this is what we should end up with. Lines running from top to bottom. And you need to do the same for the main tube. So again, the phone's being put down. The fin lines you only need to do near the bottom, but the launch lug line, you need to do the entire length of the long tube. The booster motor mount and the second stage sustainer motor mounts are a little bit different. So we're going to make the booster one first. You need one of the white tubes, one set of the rings, one of the green rings. First thing we'll do is, again, cut the little tabs to separate the rings off from the card. Again, you may need to flip it over to do the back side. Just really need to cut where the little tabs are. You don't need to cut it all around everything. Okay. Now you're going to take, you also need a ruler. Preferably not one in millimeters like the one I just grabbed. And from one end of the tube, you're going to make a mark per the instructions at 3/4 inch and another one at the 2-inch mark. Something I like to do is make a couple of marks around the circumference of the tube, just because it helps you keep, when it comes to the next step, get things even. So we now need to get this ring onto the tube. Sometimes it's a little bit tight, so if you roll up a strip of sandpaper, slide it inside and just do a little bit of sanding. Also, sometimes the tube has a little bit of a lip on it, so it can help to give that a very light sanding. See now how much easier that ring fits on. Don't just assume that both have a problem. Try fitting it. It's still tough. Again, have a rolled up strip of sandpaper. To slide on. And we're going to be gluing the rings at where the marks are, and that's where having the multiple marks helps you get these kind of perpendicular. The multiple marks helps you line them up. Thing to do here is put a bead of glue. You don't need a lot. around, then slide the ring up until things are even and lined up with your lines. You have to do that for both rings. They're not exactly perpendicular. It's not gonna, be a big problem. Now you need to put this down and let it dry for a few minutes. And I actually missed a step on the booster. We're going to take, but we wanted to let it dry anyhow. So we're going to take the red ring and make a mark at 5/8 of an inch. Again, I make several around the circumference. And if this is dry, it's dry fit. Yes, it does fit. So remove it. Put a bead of glue around the inside. And again, we need to do this quickly. Slide the ring in and get it down to the mark. At this point, the glue on my fins are dry enough. So I'm going to, again, put the second thin coat on. Install one, make sure it's perpendicular. Install number two. Check that it's perpendicular. And then 3. And just take a look at it, that it appears to be all 3 perpendicular. And let that sit for a couple of minutes to dry. Okay, now we're going to install the motor mount. This case, the green ring is going into the tube. So again, make sure it fits. You can use the same glue stick from before. I find it typically takes me three to four shots to get the bead of glue all the way around the tube. Again, a slight bead. On this edge. And slide it in again until it's even with the end of the tube. Try and get it even. Use maybe a ruler or a pencil to line up the edges. And you see how I've got some glue on the edge here. It's very important to get that off. So you may want to use the back end of the glue stick just to rub around so it's clean. Then we'll start doing the launch lugs. So you get what appears to be a short straw, and we had also cut out these rectangles from the balsa sheet earlier. We're going to cut the launch lug about in half. Try and be careful not to crush the tube. You want to sand the edge a little bit where you've cut it. Take one of these wooden pieces. See, actually I forgot there's this little nub here. So just lightly sand it. Make sure both sides are smooth. With the bead of glue. You can do the double glue joint here since the launch lug is only used for a short part of the flight. It's not quite as critical. One thing you do want to make certain though is that the straw and the wooden piece are centered on both ends. And do that for both of them. And I'm going to let those sit and dry. Okay, we're going to do two things now. First, I want to check if this fits in here. If it's a little difficult to get in, we don't want it so loose that it's falling out, but we don't want it super tight. One thing is, again, get that sheet of strip of sandpaper in there. Try and make certain that the end of the tube is smooth. The other thing we can do is take this red piece and kind of sand a little chamfer all the way around. Now let's try again. Okay, it took a little wiggling, but it went on. That's good. Now one other thing you may find, the fins don't exactly line up. That's not an issue, so don't worry about it. It's more of an aesthetics thing. Now we're going to attach the launch lugs to here. They don't give a dimension for their line. Looking at their picture, I decided I'm going to put a line at the 5-inch mark. So now I'm going to take the pieces we did earlier, put the bead of glue on, and attach it to the line for the lower one. And do the same for the upper one. Now this is one point that is going to be critical. Got a little bit of glue on my fingers. I want to stick to it more than the tube. So, do a better job wiping off my fingers. Try this again. The critical thing is to be able to look down and see that the two launch lug tubes line up. What's going to happen is when we go to launch the rocket, there'll be a metal rod that has to slide through both tubes. And so obviously they need to line up so the rod can go through. So we'll let that dry. And while that's drying, I'm just going to take the time to work the nose cone in transition. They both come together. If you have a hobby saw, use that. Otherwise, use your knife. Don't try and cut through all at once. Just go around and around and around. They take 5 or 6 passes. Or more. And you see we finally cut through. You can decide if you're going to be willing to leave the nub on the other end or if you want to cut that off. Again, basically doing the same thing. Just go around and around and around. I'm not going to take the time now. The other thing you'll see is on these plastic pieces, there's a line where the molds came together. You can help reduce that by scraping. You don't want to cut. You want to use the knife and scrape along that edge just to smooth it down some. And see how I got some excess plastic off. If you try cutting instead of scraping, you're going to end up cutting into the plastic and leaving a divot. Another thing you have to decide is if you want to paint this. Paint doesn't like the plastic very well, so it helps if you scuff it up a little bit with the sandpaper. Again, you don't want to go too bad with it. Doesn't take much to help the paint adhere, but I am doing a little extra sanding where the seam was just to try and also help make that smoother. So now the last important step, and you definitely want to make sure you've got a paper towel ready for this. Take your glue and run a bead along the fin line. And wipe off the extra with your finger. This is what's called a fillet. And it actually serves two purposes. One, it makes it more aerodynamic. Instead of a sharp edge of the fin to the body tube, creates a lot of turbulence for the air, creates something that's more rounded. And secondly, it helps strengthen the joint of the fin to the body tube. So we're going to do this for each fin. Again, careful where you end up with extra, wipe it off. Now, most glues will try to run while this is drying. So we're actually going to want to store this kind of in a horizontal position, like use the one of the plastic pieces, because if you stand it on end, the glue is going to try to run down. We're going to do the same thing for the main, and we're also going to put fillets on the launch lug. You can determine the size of the fillet, whether you use a bigger finger or a smaller finger. Almost forgot the top one. So now we've got fillets across all three fins. I actually want to try and catch this edge between the straw, the launch lug, and the standoff. Just make sure you don't get glue into the end of the launch lug. Take a toothpick or something, clean out the edge if you got any in there, or your knife. And again, we're going to try and position this so it's kind of horizontal. In this case, I'm going to let the launch lugs be on the bottom. And basically, the main part of the rocket's done. We still have to attach the shock cord and then get into our painting. But I'm going to let this dry for a few minutes first. Okay, now for one of the last steps. This piece that says 1, 2, 3, we need to cut out from the directions. It helps to pre-fold on the dotted lines. Unfold it. Now you're going to need your rubber shock cord, and something to think about. The transition fits into the tube, so you see that we need to be at least this far down so that this will clear. So what we're going to do is take our glue and put some on each section. Going to lay the elastic down on sections 2 and 3. Fold section 1 up, squeeze it down. Fold section 2 up to 3, squeeze it down. Now we're going to put some glue on here so that the flat side will be out. Now we're going to insert this into the tube. Doesn't really make a difference. I generally like to do it lined up with the launch lug. You can see how I'm sticking my finger way down and I'm pressing it in. Not certain how well this will show up, and I guess it's not, but squeeze it against the body tube and then let it dry. Okay, now it's time to paint the rocket. Decide what colors you want. I've actually decided on mine. I want to keep the transition and nose cone white. Well, I'm going to paint the rest of the rocket other colors. One thing, take a quick look, and you may even want to take your sandpaper and where the fillets are, give it a little sanding. You'll find that there's a little feeling of roughness. If there's any gaps or air bubbles that you want to fill, just do a second coat with the fillet. One thing as you're painting it, We do not want to get paint on the red coupler, so if you're going to paint things different colors, you'll want to protect it with some masking tape. Otherwise, if you're going to paint the body all the same color, like I plan to do, I can leave it together. One easy way to try and hold it is, again, take some of this scrap balsa wood, cut a long piece. You can turn the rocket upside down, stick it up inside. Now you've got a way to hold it. Another way to do it is take some newspaper and roll it up and stick it in. Make it a little bit of a cone shape to hold the rocket while you're painting. Before I paint, I am going to put some primer on. It's not essential, it's just will help with the finish. I like to use Rust-Oleum filler primer. And at this point, I'm going to start getting my first coats on. I've got my own special area set up for painting my rockets since I do so many of them. Now I'm going to be starting with the primer. You need to shake the can for about 2 minutes. I've already done that. I just didn't think you'd want to watch me shaking the can for 2 minutes. And now you're going to start doing light coats. And you'll need to rotate things to try and get all the sides. You're going to be better off doing multiple light coats rather than trying to do one heavy coat. If you try and do one heavy coat, you'll get runs. You know, some kind of painting to try and get the edges of the fins. It's a little bit difficult to do. I've never tried painting while videoing. Okay, I'm going to let this dry now. So the primer is dry. You'll find that it feels actually a little rough. What you're going to want to do is take your sandpaper. You notice I'm kind of supporting the fin with my fingers here. And lightly sand. And it's probably going to be a little easier if we separate the booster. And you can, definitely see some of the grain is still showing. So I'm going to sand the fins. We're going to sand the body tube. And quite frankly, you'll start feeling it's nice and smooth now. I'm probably actually going to do a second coat of primer and continue working this later. And by the way, after sanding the primer, before you paint or you do another coat of primer, take a paper towel to wipe off the residue from the sanding. You start seeing what's being picked up by the paper towel. You want to be able to paint or reprime on the main surface, not the dust that's just sitting on top, because it won't really stick then. And again, we can see all the dust I'm getting off the pieces. Okay, so everything's now been all nicely prepped and sanded and wiped down, and I'm ready to start painting. Again, I like Rust-Oleum. I'm going to be doing this as a black with some other trim. So some important things when painting: make sure you read the directions. Different paints, different paint types have different requirements. In this one, you'll find that they tell you need to do any recoats within an hour or wait 48 hours. So if you stop, let it sit and wait, or else you'll get nasty paint results. Now again, you need to shake it. I go for 2 minutes. I've already shaken this before I started, so I wouldn't keep you waiting. Now again, we're going to do light coats for the first pass. Rotate things around. And get a nice, even, light spray. Again, this is where doing multiple coats will come in. You try and do too heavy at once, you'll get runs and sags, and need to try and sand them out. You can see in various places some of the primer is still shining through. Not really a big issue, because we'll be back for more coats. Okay, so it's been about 12-14 minutes. I actually set a timer on my phone to remind me to come out. I just reshut the can. I did it for a little over a minute, not the full 2 minutes this time, because it has been that long. You can see how I don't have full coverage yet, but that's what more coats are for. So we'll go back to painting. Sometimes trying to get the joints where the fins meet up, it helps to get a little bit of an angle so that the actual air pressure isn't deflecting, hitting the fin, deflecting and coming back and pushing the paint away. And don't forget to get the rear edges of your fins. And you can see how it's turning into a much more uniform color after the second coat. And honestly, I will typically do 3 coats. If I see any problem areas, I might come back for a 4th, but I find 3 is typically good enough. And back for my 3rd and what I think will be my final coat. The rocket really doesn't look that bad now with just a 2nd. So the 3rd one should finish things off pretty good. Again, I've already mixed the can. I'm just gonna finish off one more coat. This last coat you can actually do a little bit heavier, have it a little bit more wet, so to speak. But again, don't go crazy or else you'll end up with runs and sags in the paint. It's just a matter of keep rotating, getting all the parts with a nice final coat here. Again, trying to get the back of the fins. And we'll let this dry, and I'm going to be letting it sit for 48 hours. So, catch you later.